I think it'll be incredibly important to, have a good funeral for white innocence and white supremacy. Hello. Casco is actually quite known in the international contemporary art world. Well, I've been curator at Casco. That has been my title. So, before Casco was Casco Art Institute working for the Commons. Casco was Casco Office for Art, Design and Theory. This institutional change and the name change is, emblematic of also trying to put more power into this notion of the commons and commoning practice. But basically, in summary, the commons are, some sort of identifiable collection of resources that are cared for and shared by a group of people. So it's like land and a kind of earth commons or natural resources are one way to think of it, but then there's also social commons and knowledge commons and of course like economic commons. A death doula would be actually quite similar to a birth doula, but you're focusing on the transition, holistic support through the transition, out of life rather than entering into it. Like the first task of birth doulas was to reclaim birth, how it's done. And it's not just this medical experience. And death doulas, I think similarly, the first task is actually like reclaiming death, how we die. And then when there's more thought put into it, perhaps, it's more ease. And also for those around you to actually trust too that they're doing it as you wish. Even by simply like keeping a log of all your usernames and passwords for your accounts can tremendously help with your loved ones closing up your life, which will have to happen anyways, regardless of whether or not you care about it. I had quite a grief experience with the breakup, and then I was like, all right, now it's time. I've always wanted to volunteer at a hospice, now's the time. And so I've been doing that now every week since the summer of 2019. But it's been one of the most important chapters in my life is actually starting there. It's a place that's really so much about life. Death is really the stuff of life. And when you get to be around, the dying process, also time slows. What's important also comes to the surface. And yeah, it puts things into perspective. Of course, I do, death meditations, and I also practice different kinds of mindfulness, of also thinking about impermanence on many levels. But ultimately, it's about taking care and having a quality of relationships around me. Most of us want to die at home, but majority of people really die in hospitals or in hospice or outside of the home. So I think also maybe my work as a death doula too is to think about ways in which death is brought back to home. It can be so incredible to do home funerals, especially for children, which it's we don't have a lot of ways in which we are able to work with children about loss of loved ones. And something like a home funeral is that if there's a special place of which the beloved will be there for a couple of days, then the child has an opportunity to actually say goodbye on their terms. Rather than just oh, here's a funeral, one moment, goodbye, it's over, the body goes away. I think a lot about this amazing text called Mourning and Militancy from the cultural theorist Douglas Crimp. But he's talking about the AIDS crisis in the late 80s, early 90s, but he's writing about it and the role of what public mourning means. And I always think about how he described how grief can be such a psychosomatic experience that like when you don't process grief, it's going to reside somewhere in your body. And in particular, he talked about how he had an infected tear duct because he just couldn't cry. A lot of times it's quite silly, you know. I mean, my brother, for example, was like, yeah, cremate me and then like mix it in with cement and cast it into a lobster and just like drop me into the ocean. You know, and I mean, there's so many different interesting ideas, but once you give space to someone to like, actually you can design this, you can have a say. I think it'll be incredibly important to, you know, have a good funeral for white innocence and white supremacy. I mean, if you think about oppression, if it's, you know, the four I's of oppression, it's internalize, it's ideological, it's interpersonal, it's institutionalized. You know, we're going to have to do a lot of work of, for example, thinking about how white supremacy or whiteness, so not about like just being like, I'm white, how actually the culture of white supremacy gets so ingrained into us. What does it mean to unlearn those things? And, you know, I think that it'll be really important for the future of thinking about, you know, living here, what it means to really embrace people from all different backgrounds. But what's it going to be like? How are we going to really work through that difficult stuff that's deep down in us that we don't even know how much we need to be like, you know, to wake up from? Yeah, I think it's quite a tricky balance, but it's really important of actually coming to the table first with the assumption that like we are different. But then what do we have in common from there? I think death anxiety is really responsible for so much terror and violence in the world. But perhaps confronting death a little bit more actively, we can understand it as another kind of transformation. And, you know, the hardest aspect for humans to really accept is change. Our culture, yeah, like other forms of care work, really puts that to the side. And especially in Western cultures or in the global North, it's really like, oop, hide it. Be as far away from it as possible, you know, and you gotta go right back to work when you lose someone, like this kind of thing. You know, it's like what it means to be alive, what it means to be in a body is that like you will become sick and, well, in need of help and care. And so this is often something that, like the arts, is like, you know, care work is so often undervalued when it's vital, and I would say art is also vital for our lives, because it helps us understand our lives, you know, and make meaning from it. You know, doctors, they can find ways to keep us alive and keep us living, but then, you know, it's really art and culture that helps us identify like what it means to live.